All right, that's better. In Ankara, in Turkey, to have at least such a big event in 4 years, I've been to a number of these across the world, and it's hard to get started, but it's great to see the community coming together. So I'll just talk about our experience with DevOps in several dimensions. One, I'm with Opsgenie. I'm one of the founders. We started this company. This is not working. Okay. Neither is this. All right. About 7 years ago in Ankara, and the software we provide, the service we provide, is used heavily by organizations that adopt DevOps practices. So we built something that is part of this ecosystem. But also, we have been practicing this for quite some time. So I wanted to talk about our experience of building Opsgenie and what DevOps meant for it. One of the key things is that Opsgenie is largely an operational service that helps customers that have critical, always-on services. If you have a problem and you cannot afford downtime, you need to get to the right person as quickly as possible. And if you are practicing DevOps, it's typically whoever is the best person, the developer building that solution, and so on. And we do the alerting process, manage the on-call processes, and so on. And since those organizations, there are 5,000 companies across the world now, rely on it, the Opsgenie had to be working at all times, right? Like if Opsgenie is not working and you cannot tell the right people, that's a big problem. So we engineered this from the beginning as a very reliable, always-on type of a service. So before I get to Opsgenie, just a quick background on mine. I went to grad school in US in '93, and '94 I started working as a deployment engineer in US, which basically we sat between development, engineering, and operations. And it was a new term, actually. It was one of our colleagues found it. It wasn't a practice at the time. And we were deploying servers. The only difference between now that the server was getting shipped to us, we were unboxing them, installed the operating system, all the applications we wanted. They were Novell servers, box them back, and then ship it. While it was going with FedEx, we were also taking a plane, go to the place that the server should be, and then unbox it and then set it up. So it was a little bit longer process than what you deploy in EC2 today, but the concepts were very similar. And one of the core, I think, related to here is the notion of the silos, because we were working as I mentioned, the engineering, the deployment and operations as different teams. And these teams were in different locations, San Francisco, some in New York and Michigan. As you can imagine, there were significant communication challenges between them. This is pre-Slack and so on. In some ways, I guess it's pre-internet. So, as you can imagine, it's not easy to do a Zoom video call and talk to them and so on. And all those communication challenges create the potential of the silo problem even higher. And we had a lot of those problems. In deployment, we thought all the engineering guys were idiots, because the stuff that was coming through to us was low quality. As we were deploying, we would run into problems. In one site, I was running this deployment tool that was built by an engineering team, and as it was running, it was giving error messages. I asked the senior guy who I was shadowing and learning from what those were, and he said, not his problem. That was an engineering script that his job was to run it. And I said, okay. I was the junior guy learning from him. And the next day, I was giving training to the local people. Well, that error turned out to be that it was copying data to one place, and we were cloning, resetting the machine, and then copying it back. And at the end, it was trying to delete the data on the server, that was failing. So when you were working on the second machine, it was copying the same data to the second machine as well. And one of the manager's data ended up in all kinds of other servers and laptops, some of it critical. And it turned out when I was giving the training, it came up. I was readily walked out of the building as a problem. So like when you have not communication and then not ownership of the entire process, and you kind of optimize for what you are doing and not overall. DevOps, the notion of dev and ops working together, but the concept applies to even more. Now you might even start hearing DevSecOps, because security has to be part of it, and other acronyms being added to it, because the core idea is that we really need to work as a team, otherwise it doesn't work. One of the reasons for this is that the handoffs are very difficult. Like when you try to do a handoff, there is degradation of information. The people who are taking over from you don't really understand everything, and if you're not working together and don't understand what they are doing, this becomes a significant risk. The engineering doesn't understand the business problem that they are solving. Operations don't know what's going on, so they push back on all changes. Deployment and so on, like security is not baked in, and you try to put it in afterwards, also becomes a problem. So handoffs are hard. So how do we solve this? Well, one way is to solve it so that the same team is doing everything, which sounds great. It's not so easy. But this kind of, some people start understanding DevOps as this, that developers now do everything. It started with you build it, you run it concept. Now it's like you build it, you run it, you baby it, you operate it, support it, sell it, you know, you name it. Now the developers are expected to do a lot more. In some ways, you can understand the appeal, right? Like if you're doing this way, then no more handoff worries. Like if the developer understands the business case, does all the things in the middle of the development teams, at least, the same teams, and then you're supporting and even selling it, you know, during the support, during the sales and so on, then it becomes a much easier. Like, you know, you don't have this problem of how do I pass it on and so on. But obviously, there are problems with this. Like it became like a reasonable idea maybe when it was just dev and ops, but when you start thinking about it, this is highly difficult, if not impossible, for one person to do, or one skill set to do. So I liken this to asking the developers to be special agents like James Bond. He can do everything, right? Like since he's a fictional character, he doesn't suffer from our deficiencies. He can run, ski, fly, seduce the ladies, whatever you can think of, he can do, and so that you can send it to somewhere. You don't need to send our army. You can send James Bond, and he can figure it all out, often alone with maybe little support. This obviously is not really possible, but at least one thing that where you start is that well, you at least have to provide them the right tools, right? Like beyond the culture that you go on. So a lot of us, a lot of organizations immediately turn into tools. Like when you say DevOps, they hear tools because like you have to do all this. Well, how do I do it? I need to automate it. If you're a Bond fan through the years, you would have noticed all the tools that he has that provided by Q, another character, the brainiac of the Bond series. You know, from the jetpack to the submarine cars. I don't know, everyone has different, fans have different favorites, to all these different kind of watches that he had through the years that solved magical problems for him. Is kind of I liken it to what we originally called the DevOps engineers, which we don't call them that anymore, but there were really a set of people that enabled everyone to be able to practice DevOps, which is to build these automated systems, at least so that the developers don't have to know everything, or at least do everything by themselves manually. If you can automate some of this, it becomes possible to do more, like as much as possible. So this is kind of how things evolved. But obviously, even if you're automating things, it's not possible for one person to do, or one persona to do all these things. But I think the key is to maybe not do everything, but have an understanding of what all these things are, like how things are done, and not be oblivious to how the business works in other parts, and so on. And I found this is probably as close to magic bullet as possible. Even 25 years ago, when I put the deployment engineer in 1994, and just to be clear, that wasn't a typo, it was 1994. One of our solutions was to do a rotation. So we had people from engineering come to deployment team, work with us. Deployment team, we send it to the operations to support what we were deploying, and operations went to engineering, and it had a profound impact on how the overall solution worked, because now if nothing else, you met those people, and you didn't jump into conclusion that they are idiots because you knew those people, but also you started understanding like why, if they were bad, why they were bad. Even one step further, since you knew the next step, you could help it become not from as bad. So those all were, I think, the positive results of that I've seen even 25 years ago when we were doing this, of understanding different roles and what was required and so on. And it helped then, and it helps, I think, in many organizations today. So with that, like the Opsgenie experience with this, which I mentioned, I wanted to talk a little bit about. We started 7 years ago in Ankara, in the Teknokent, and we were, I think at the time, maybe 6, 7 people when we started. We didn't decide to adopt DevOps or transform into DevOps, right? Like we were a small team. I've been to certain, like these type of processes before, like type of Opsgenie type product before in the past. It requires a few dozen people in different roles to come up with it. With the AWS and cloud services and so on, now it's possible for a single team to build such products, which is, I think it's amazing. But since we were all engineers there were no operations people, no network expert, no security expert. The team was experienced in Agile. We had been doing test-driven development and so on for quite a number of years. We had worked together. But operating as a service, Opsgenie is a software as a service, so we operate the product that we are building, was new to us as well. And as we started doing that, we started learning how that works. And it is very different, but since it was the same people, we sort of naturally fell into it. And the product wasn't designed explicitly for DevOps. Like as we iterated and the customers came in, it evolved to it. It was originally mobile IT management. We wanted to use mobile devices in IT management. We thought the way it was done was archaic, and it kind of evolved to alerting, on-call management as what it was being asked from the customers at the time. But the key is that like the same team who was developing had to run it. You run it aspect of it, but also make it reliable and secure as well. So that forced us into the way that we operated, and not just like from a technical perspective. In early years, when we were working on Opsgenie, every developer knew every customer. Every time there was a sale, it would drop to our chat. The support was done by the developers, by all of us in the team. The business case, I was the subject matter expert. I talked to the developers. We didn't write specs that for like pages and pages and hand it off from system analyst to it normally gets done in waterfall. We talked a lot. They talked to customers a lot. So it was very important for us everyone to understand the use case, which I think did. But all this is sort of a very key ingredients, I think, into the DevOps mindset, which is the empathy, understanding, from customer to what the business side and so on. And when you have that, when you are doing support and talking to customers so that you understand what they are doing, or, you're the one building and then you're the one operating, it builds different muscles. So we started using that philosophy of understanding everywhere. But it's still, at some point you run into problems. Yeah, like we started 6, 7 people, 8 people, and everyone understood what the business case was, what we were doing, what the history, right? Like we moved the product, like pivoted a little bit. They understood that history. They understood the customers. Well, then we started getting new people. And as soon as you get new people, you have now different levels of it. First of all, they didn't know the entire code base. So you couldn't put them on call. So, again, like we had customers from probably the first few months from Australia to Argentina. One of our big customers were in Latin America. So there were no time breaks in the 24-hour cycle that customers weren't using the product. And the product is also used after hours, like when there's a problem to tell them. So it's not one of these things that, once the day is over, you're done. So when you have that cycle and you have to support it with a small team, someone is on call. So my co-founders, Abdurrahim and Sezgin, knew the code base. To this day, they know everything about the code base, and there are not that many people like that. So they were the only people who could be on call, and when there is a problem, respond and solve it quickly. The new engineers knew what they were working on, but not the entire code base, so they couldn't do it. And early on, there is a lot of problems, like you learn as you build to make it reliable, because we were also using different services from other people. One of that service problem, what do you do? Or the AWS was early days, there were lots of problems there as we learned and so on. So being on call, like when you're 2 people and one of you are on call at night, almost every night, every other night, like it's a painful experience, and that pain teaches you to prioritize things that would prevent you from waking up every night, and then that's what I call alignment. So if the people who suffer from not building quality products are not the same people that decide, what to work on, you have the misalignment, right? Like, so the business person can say, I want this feature, that feature, and those, and they can take precedence over it. But in our case, we were all suffering when it was a problem. Even though I couldn't solve the problem, I would stay up and for any kind of problem myself, just to understand what was going on and make decisions necessary. But we could see the impact of what that was, so we really turned it around in terms of what do we invest on. And Opsgenie right now is, after several years, the engineering team behind Opsgenie is one of the best in the world, and I've seen many. But sometimes surprises people in Turkey that Opsgenie is a Turkish team, engineering team, still in Ankara. It was acquired a year ago by Atlassian, the makers of Jira and so on. But it still operates out of Ankara with about 100 people there. And it's by far the most reliable service in our market space. It's 5 nines for a long time.
and they were able to maintain that because we were able to set this DevOps mentality as well as the aligning the pain so that the person who's building it thinks about, you don't just develop and hand it over and someone else in operations, as it is in the many waterfall type organizations. You know that it's going to get back to you, so you kind of build it differently, or you're much more conscientious about how to architect something. So this concept of reliability, security, and performance is, non-functional requirements. Sometimes you may hear talked about. So that Opsgenie has functional capability, right? Like it sends alerts and you can do X, Y, Z, manage your on-call schedule. So you generally, especially business people, will focus on that, but typically in organizations, developers also focus on those. Like these non-functional require someone else's job, right? Like you pass it to operations and they have to do it. That's where things go wrong. So if you don't have that everybody's job, it becomes not possible to achieve this. So you can see the stats. Our stats are published because it's important to our customers. The expectation is there. I don't think any of this that we were able to, I think, provide a very reliable and high-performance service. Any alert that comes into Opsgenie average processing time is around 300 milliseconds. And this was all possible because of that culture, and it was one of the main reasons of why we were required. That being able to operate a service at that level, it doesn't happen, and I think it wouldn't happen without the DevOps practices that from day one I think we embraced. I'm pretty much done with what I wanted to say about that, but mention a couple of things like beyond the culture in terms of reliability. Like if you want to do something like this, as the requirements to offer these things increase, and I think just like everywhere else in the world, in Turkey as well, the demand on us as developers, SREs, whatever your job title is, to provide services that are always on, always working, fast, scalable, will just keep increasing. I'm sure you are feeling that. To do that, like one of the key things we have done is that when you're building things, you have to invest more on these non-functional requirements. You can't bolt them on afterwards. I think one of the things that we did extremely well and from the beginning was the instrumentation. The team put a lot of effort into making the code tell you things. That's what we kind of call instrumentation, like the events. I'm doing this, I'm doing that. So when something happens in an always-on system, you have to, in a short amount of time, ask questions to your system to figure out what's happening. Typically, when there is an incident like that can already or may cause an outage. In our analysis of the incidents, 70% of time is spent on figuring out what is happening, like understanding what's happening. And then once you know that, depending on your systems, you can fix it in fairly quickly. So that 20% is actual fixing, 80% is understanding what's wrong, and that highly depends on how much data you have and the monitoring systems that you have. So we put a lot of effort into this, building, alerting, and alerting for us was it's okay. So for us, obviously, since it's also the service that we are building, was an important factor of it. The very simple difference, like if you have alerts and can tell you that something is going wrong, if you have the right architecture, you can prevent outages. And if you want to go for like 5 nines, 99.999 type availability, you have to prevent
outages. Like once the outage happens, the time to respond and to figure out what happens and restore the service, you're going to lose. So we had extensive alerting that to tell us like something is going wrong, and that something can be something we manage, or we rely on AWS service, other services that we use, and so on. So we built lots of this, and I think it's essential to have instrumentation there. That's all I wanted to present, and just wanted to have one more minute. If there's any questions, I'll take at least one. Or like at most one, I should say, since it's only 1 minute. All right. Thank you.
Berkay. So we have one question.
Yeah.
We use this app called SiliConf. If you didn't download it yet, you should. You can ask questions. And also, like, if you have questions right now, I can come close to you and you can ask. Soruyu yansıtacağız.
Ask questions through the app. Cool, yeah.
We can, yes. So the question is, what is Opsgenie's development methodology, Agile, Kanban, Waterfall, your personal point of view of methodology in SDLC departments?
Software Development Lifecycle departments.
Yes.
We certainly do Agile, and we've been doing it with the core team for the last 12, 13 years. We had another startup before that. So extreme programming type stuff, test-driven development and so on. I'm not the best person to answer this. I'm more the product guy. I would highly recommend you to reach out to Sezgin, Küçük Karaslan, and Abdurrahim Eke, my co-founders, who were the masterminds behind and still are Opsgenie. So they've have a lot of experience. Again, we've been working over 10 years with both of them, and we tried a bunch of different things, what works, what doesn't, the peer programming, the pros and cons, and so on. So, and they are very approachable people, would be happy to chat on any of those topics.